My name is Paul H. I've been asked to do a series of talks on the 12 steps of recovery. I'd like to start with a little generalized bio. We're going to be talking about alcoholism, which I believe is sort of like a mental parasite that sort of will take over the system that you call you and influence it and basically have a life by taking yours. So the root to me of the alcoholism when I was young was a sense of irritability, restlessness, and discontent that I grew into. Because when I was very young, I would say my golden years were between 2 and 4. At that point, when I was playing, that's all I was doing was playing. I wasn't thinking about will I be playing next week because time hadn't set in yet. And I wasn't thinking I could be anywhere else because I hadn't entertained that possibility. So what you would call being in the moment was just the norm. So what occurred was I outgrew that state of mind, which I feel there was sort of a brightness to it and a sense of an immediacy and spontaneity that I outgrew, and I started to grow into introspection where it seemed like my attention and interest went to the thought stream instead of the living of the day. This provoked an irritability, restlessness, and discontent that built as I kept getting older, rooted in this a negative feeling of wrongness based on who I was. An example of it is I remember when I was 11 years old, I was going through the hallway at school, and a girl said hello to me. And I went home and wondered what she meant by it for about 5 hours. I was in the throes of being obsessed with self. Everything was really, really profound. It was like the days of just walking into a room unaccompanied by thought was over. Everything was thought about. Everything was tried to be seen in many different angles. And it was just producing a deep irritability, restlessness, and discontent that was demanding relief. And I wasn't finding any relief through sports or anything like that. One night when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I was at a Little League game, and it was a night game, and my mother hadn't come to the game, so I was going to walk home. And at that game, a guy came in after the game into the dugout with 2 6-packs of beer. That was when I had my first drink of alcohol. And at that night, basically my athletic career came to a screeching halt because I had found what I was looking for, which was relief from alcoholism. So drinking alcohol was my first solution to alcoholism. What occurred was then, from that point on, I wanted that relief. And so I started to hunt it. And it produced a sort of, what occurred in my life, as soon as I started drinking, I had a realization that I have a magnetic appeal to people in uniform. I started to have consequences from my drinking, and they were getting arrested. And I was growing up in outside New York City, and the consequences were getting more and more grave as I went on. By the time I hit 16 years old, I had gotten kicked out of school, and I was dealing drugs out of my mother's house. I lived in a 2-family house in Long Island, and we were the family on the bottom floor. And there was a cellar, and in that cellar there was a room that I made up my little office. And from there I was selling drugs, and I didn't know that my house was under surveillance, my mother's house. And after a few months of doing business, I was sitting in my room with 7 guys, watching a construction light blinking on and off like a cheap strobe light, and we were all tripping on LSD, and I had 1,000 hits of LSD in the room, and the police raided the house, and I got my first big major arrest. This set off trains of circumstances that I felt brought me much misfortune I didn't deserve, and so I kept relying on what produced that first effect, and it kept producing the same effects. My life started to spiral downward. And by the time I got to a certain age, in my 30s, I ended up in San Francisco, and I ended up having to enter a drug and alcohol program called Delancey Street. And what I did was I walked into this building, and they had a bench that when you sat on it, it signified you have lost the game of life, basically. You were coming over to the sidelines to get some help. But I was in the throes of this little video in my head of Paul. When anything ever happened to me, it was like me portraying the person it was happening to. I was very, very disengaged from my own life. So I sat on this bench, and I was really pretty screwed. And I looked at there was a big clock across the way from me, and there was all these people running around, well-dressed, very busy. And I sat there at 6 o'clock, and I said to myself, I looked at the clock, I'm going to give these people to 6:30 or I'm out of here. Like, I had a lot of important engagements to keep. I had nowhere to go. I didn't have a pot to piss in. So, but by 6:28, they brought me into a room and they interviewed me, and they said one thing which I was very keen on, which was, do you want to have a place to stay tonight? And that's what I really needed. I needed a place to stay. And they said, well, you have to make a 2-year commitment. Now, this was a sort of a little bit of a, I just gulped, but I decided, oh, sure, I'll stay here for 2 years with absolutely no intention of staying there for more than a night. But what occurred is they accepted me. And by 6:28, I was a full-fledged member of Delancey Street, which had like 300 clients running around. So they released me into the mass population. And it was amazing that in Delancey Street, as a buffer between me, I actually thrived, and I stayed sober for the 2 years I was there. I stayed the whole 2 years. I went to college. You know, I'm not really proud of it, but I actually do great in an institutional setting. I really do pretty good when people are telling me what to do. So I was going along my way in that program, and I wasn't asking much counsel. It had nothing to do with what we call a spiritual program. It was just behavior modification, and you worked 6 days a week, and if you did anything wrong, you were extremely punished. So that was sufficient to keep me at bay, so to speak. But after about a year, I started to think about what my real problem was, and I felt like I had localized it to one aspect of living, which was my narcotic use, which was definitely the problem. But I made a little amendment when I came to that conclusion, and that amendment was I can probably drink. Now, I didn't run this by anyone in the facility. I just stored it in my head, and I continued with the program. And what occurred was, at the 20-month mark, I had a decision to make. They said, hey, do you want to stay 5 more years in this program? You can sign up, or you can enter this workout program where you get a job outside and you work for 4 months. And if you fill a few requirements, you can graduate and you'll be done. You will have kept your 2-year commitment. And I went for the latter. You know, I said, yeah, I'll take the 4-month workout. So I had to get a job, which I did, driving a little step van. Delivering hardware. I had to open up a checking account, which I did, and I had to get a car, which I did. So I was working for 4 months. They were helping me save my money, and at the 4-month mark, the next thing I needed to do was find a place to live outside of Delancey Street, this program. So I started to look around San Francisco, and I found a really nice place on Larkin and Filbert. There was 2 girls that were living there, and it was cheap enough. I could afford it, and I really wanted the place, but there was like 20 applicants looking to get this place. But at this point, I looked pretty good. I had khaki pants, blue blazer. I hadn't been drinking or using for 2 years. So I like to say my realtor was Dr. Jekyll. They liked Dr. Jekyll, yeah. But Mr. Hyde was going to be moving in, unbeknownst to myself, because Delancey Street had told me, though that Mr. Hyde period was rather long, it was over, that I was going to be Dr. Jekyll from now on. And I was hoping they were right, but I had a suspicion that maybe not. But I entered that house and that agreement of paying rent there as Dr. Jekyll. But as soon as I left Delancey Street, the irritability, restlessness, and discontentment, the base of alcoholism in the feeling level, overcame me, came up in me really strong, and I didn't know what to do with myself after I got out for work. It seemed like an eternity till the time, like at 11 o'clock, I'd be in bed. I couldn't handle the responsibility of how to fill my own time. I'd gotten used to being told what to do. So this one night I was sitting in my room, and the advertising started to occur in my head, and it started telling me what I'd been missing for the last 2 years, like all this incredible great times, like, but it didn't really tell me specifically what I was missing, like getting shot at, run over by cars, getting arrested. It made it more mythical and romantic, and so I fell for it. And I got into my little Toyota Corolla and I drove to a bar the first time in 2 years. It was called the Rose and Thistle in California in Polk. We used to call it the Nose and Sniffle then. And I walked in there armed with this idea that I can drink. And sat down at the bar, and being obsessed with this idea of me, I thought the bartender had been getting my newsletter and that I should not have a drink. But I just put the money down and he gave me a beer. And I had my first beer in 2 years. And nothing happened. It seemed to be like I had an impunity, you know. The AA police didn't rush in. No one even turned around to look. So I ordered a second beer. And I'm starting to drink the second beer. And halfway through the second beer, it's not enough for me. I want more, you know. And whatever you think more is, just fill in that blank. But let's just call it more. So I looked around the bar and to see if there was anyone selling more, and the same guy that used to sell more there was still there, like he had a franchise at this place. And then I bought some more, and I went out to my Toyota Corolla, which I was going to lose in 2 days after that, and I did a line of more. And as soon as I did the line of more, it was like that movie The Shining, when Jack Nicholson comes through the bathroom the door at the end. Here's Johnny. It was just like that. I was possessed, and I went on a 10-month run from that night on. Forgot all about the college I went to in Delancey Street. I lost the job. Everything just fell away, and I was taken over by that parasite again called alcoholism. And I had 2 years of health, so it took 10 months. But what occurred was I ended up on what you would call a bottom again. And every time I landed on a bottom, you know, I sort of just moved in. You know, I put curtains up and I invited people over. The problem was, no matter how low the bottom was, I kept getting evicted from that bottom and going to a lower one. So after 10 months of running around like this, I went on an adventure, St. Patrick's Day, 1988, March 17th, I think. And I ended up March 20th in a town about 2 hours north of San Francisco called Calistoga. And I found myself in a trailer park with a guy in a trailer who I didn't know, watching a cowboy movie and drinking a bottle of Royal Gate vodka, a very, very fine quality vodka, about 90 cents a pint. Yeah. And we were passing this bottle of vodka back and forth, and we were waiting for a mutual acquaintance. Hopefully someone would have money so we could get more. And I didn't know this dude. I just sort of, circumstances brought me into this trailer, and there I'm sitting with him. And I look at him, and he's big. He's a heavy guy with bulbous nose and varicose veins on his face. And I said to myself, looking at him, hey, this guy's a bum, you know? But lo and behold, he looked at me like I was a bum, or that's how I interpreted it. And what occurred then was my head stopped. Something like almost like a portal opened up, and some energy that was sufficient enough to stop the stream of the selfing, of the alcoholism, put it at bay for a couple of minutes. And it was like a CNN news flash. There was no story, just a headline. And the headline was, I'm screwed. Yeah. Now, everyone who knew me knew I'd been screwed for quite a while, but it was like news to me. It just stopped me in my tracks. I didn't reach for the vodka again. And I started to think, I got to do something. And I wasn't even close to thinking that 2 minutes before, yeah. And so I went to a phone booth and I called Delancey Street and I asked if they would take me back. And they'd been getting my newsletter, basically, and they said, no, you can't come back right now. You can come back in a month and we'll interview you again, and maybe we'll take you, maybe we won't. So this portal that opened up, and whatever came through some honesty had come with it. And I said the first honest thing I'd said in 10 months, and that is, hey, I don't think I have a month, you know? And so I got off the phone and I called a woman I used to party with in the city, and I must have sounded humble enough that she bought into what I was saying. I said, hey, can you help me? I need a ride back to the city. I'm basically just done, so to speak. And so she'd always wanted to help me. So she drove up. Takes about an hour and a half. In that hour and a half, I had a miraculous alcoholic recovery. I wanted to get loaded again. Forgot all about the portal and the moment of clarity. Just said, I just wanted to get high. And that's not really what I wanted to get. I wanted to escape from self, basically, but I would call it I wanted to get high. So she came up and I got in the car and I started trying to talk her into buying alcohol and getting the drugs and the dirty magazines and renting a hotel room. But she had followed that equation with me many times. I don't think it had been that satisfying for her. So she said no. And she says, hey, do you want a place to stay tonight? And that was what I wanted. Yeah. She said, well, you got to go to a recovery meeting. Now, this sounded incredibly incredibly different than the last time I had this deal, which was 2 years before, 2 years and 10 months. And I had to make a 2-year commitment for that one night of sanctuary. She says, just go to a meeting for 1 hour and you can stay at my house. So I said, definitely, let's go. So she brought me to my first meeting, March 21st, 1988. And I've been sober and clean since then. And so in my case, I didn't come to AA based on a bottom. I really believe I came to AA based on grace, because I was just going to keep on keeping on until either I died or institutionalized it again or go to jail. I had no intention. I had really come to accept the destiny of my life, which was I'm just going to keep trying to get loaded until something stops me. And so I wasn't influenced greatly by the bottoms. It was just, for me, a moment of grace. And that's my whole program is based on that, because when I went to her house and I finally got to sleep, the miracle basically happened when I was asleep. Because when I woke up the next day, that imperative to get high, to get loaded, had dimmed down, and some other thoughts took its place, which is, I better call this program, this AA, and find out if there's a meeting earlier than 8 o'clock at night, because I'm not going to make it till 8 o'clock at night. And I did. I called up and I went to a meeting at 12 that day, and I've been going to meetings and staying in our community for the last almost 24 years. So that's the primer to what we're going to try to go over, because what initiates the psychic change for me is grace. What fills the psychic change is grace. But the way the grace can come through into an alcoholic's life is through the 12 steps of recovery. It's sort of like if someone came over to me and asked me for my suggestions would probably get them loaded. If I followed my suggestions, I would probably get loaded. But my suggestions that I give people now is influenced from the original suggestions I was given in the program of recovery. And it's like all the people who have what I want, they're like seeds. We've all germinated out of 12 seeds, and those are the 12 steps of AA. And what is presented today through this video is not of any of my making. It's the influence of a power greater than self that has been able to access through me into life through the steps in the program of AA. So I've been asked to talk about the first, second, third, fourth, up to the 12th step. And so let's go. We'll do it now. So in the big book of AA, I wanted to talk about this. In the foreword, the first foreword, he makes a simple statement. Now, this book, of course, was written by 100 people, and I think they participated with the main man called Bill W. And it was it came out in 1939. The program of recovery started in 1935. But he has this incredible statement here And it says, we of AA are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now, the word seemingly means it appears to be true or false to you. This is how important it is, because this disease, though its effects can be seen physically, is not a physical disease. You can't take an x-ray of alcoholism. It's a mental disease. And the weirdest solution they found is not physical recuperation or changing your mind, though that's what will happen, but a spiritual solution. In other words, we're not going to seek the solution from the problem. We're going to admit the problem and then ask for a solution from somewhere else. That's the whole basis of AA to me. Yeah? So seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So that statement is not saying it's a hopeless state of mind and body. Because if it was, how could we have recovered? Yeah? If it was a hopeless state of mind and body, there would be no solution. You would just have to hunker down and try to minimize the effects. But it says it's a seemingly hopeless. So if the mind that has alcoholism can change, that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body and its tyranny over you can shift because your mind has changed. You now see that it isn't a hopeless state. It just appears to be. Yeah? This is what I think is unbelievable in AA. So that's so we'll go to the first step. And the first step is stated clearly as, let's see, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, when I heard that statement of powerlessness over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable, at that time it seemed like it was a cause and effect. The cause of the unmanageability was I was drinking and I couldn't stop drinking. And that caused the unmanageability. And so my belief when I came to AA was if I could stop drinking, then my problems would cease. But that's not actually what worked out. I stopped drinking and then the problems were even more glaring because I wasn't dimming them down or covering them up anymore. So I like more the statement in How It Works where he says there are three pertinent things we must be convinced of, and our experience before and after, meaning before and after you get sober, will verify these 3 points. The first one is that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That's more, that fits better with me now. Yeah? I don't believe the powerlessness caused the unmanageability. I actually believe my drive to manage my life came up with the solution of alcohol for alcoholism, which produced tons more problems because the real dilemma is I'm not managerial quality. Yeah? I'm not meant to be running this show. I have to open myself up to some power greater than what I take to be me to give me some direction. So some people say in the first step, that's the only step that you can do perfectly. For me, when I came into AA, I had all the evidence I could ever need that I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable. Prior to that statement, they have Dr. Silkworth talks about the real aspects of the disease. Now, he says that the disease is of 2 parts. There's the mental obsession and the physical allergy. It's sort of like having an allergy, like if you ate strawberries, you were going to get hives. So no matter how many times you didn't want to get the hives, if you ate the strawberries, you were going to get the hives. Yeah? So the solution is to deal with the obsession or the drive to eat strawberries. Because once you've eaten the strawberries, it's sort of too late. Yeah? The craving is going to kick in and you're going to get the hives. So the idea of a shift of mind is the root of, to me, the first step, because I admit that I was powerless and that my life became unmanageable. In that point, when there's the admittance of powerlessness, you would think that your experience would be of powerlessness. But actually, it's totally different. When you admit you're powerless, you have an experience of power. As soon as you forget your own powerlessness, then you start experiencing powerlessness, which And those experiences are frustration because people aren't doing what you want to do. It's not going your way. No matter how much you manage, it doesn't seem to pan out. So the whole first step for me is in admittance that I am powerless over alcohol. I'm in a condition where I'm receiving power. Yeah. So I never experience powerlessness anymore. I walk around with a sense of power because I'm not trying to exert any. So the first step in AA is that we admit that we're powerless and our life has become unmanageable. Now, in this case, I found my drinking and using, in a sense, was a denial of the true root cause of alcoholism, which is the unmanageability, the desire to manage or to play God. So I have to admit that all that stuff that I've been mentally denying. And when I admit all that stuff, it can be almost like an ego death, but what arises out of that is freedom. So it's almost like a roundabout way. First, I've got to finally accept what my mind's been denying for a long time, let it land, feel that uncomfortability, but then I'm not that. Yeah? What my life was, I was living from a mental I'm not that, which made me be that every freaking day. I was denying my inability to manage. I was denying my alcoholism, and therefore I lived alcoholically. So now, instead of living in that mental denial, I go the other way. I admit to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic, and at that point, the possibility of never living another day as one arises. Yeah? So through giving up the system of mind, which is, okay, I don't want to be that, I'm going to deny it. Yeah? I'm going to disassociate. I'm going to lie about it. I'm going to act as if I'm not. It doesn't freaking work. When you allow it to be exactly what it wants or presents itself to be, which is you ultimately realize it's not you. That's the freedom from alcoholism, yes? The freedom from alcoholism is when you finally admit that you are that, and then ultimately you'll realize you are not that, and you never were that. It's sort of like a foreign installment has taken you over, and its root premise is, let's say if a parasite took you over and it was really hostile. Yeah? I mean, if it took you over, you weren't going to do well. For that parasite to continue to thrive, it would have to have a great strategy, yeah? To convince the host, yeah, not to throw the parasite off. What does it do? For me, it's the presentation of the mind of an image of you, called self, with a small s. I call it the activity of selfing. Like a mental process is producing this sense of being a long-lasting, independent, separate entity. You didn't have it when you were about a year old in your life. You did not have a sense of being a separate you. You were actually awareness and consciousness having conscious contact. But then the mental process grew enough. They say it basically started to grow at the same time as the language center grows, yeah, around 18 months. Then there's a feeling of you starts arising. Well, I feel the parasite of alcoholism has jacked into that aspect of that mental process that produces the sense of being you, and it influences that you it produces. And that you it produces becomes a quote-unquote alcoholic you. Yeah. Now that starts getting more and more dominant. Yeah. And therefore, what in AA they bring to be the root of the problem, which is obsession with self, I believe it's gone past that. I don't believe it's obsession with self. I believe it's identification as self. Yeah. And the obsession with self reinforces the identification. Yeah. It's sort of like if you ever see a movie, there's certain horror movies where some woman really adores this one starlet, and she starts wearing the same clothes as the starlet, tries to go to the same places, tries to date the same men. And after a while, that's not enough. She starts killing the men, and and then she wants to kill the starlet and become the starlet. And you say, man, that's an extreme obsession. But I think identification's way past that. You take yourself to be what the mind's presenting you to be. And if the mind's presenting you to be a certain self its basis is irritable restlessness and discontent, you're going to want to get relief all day, but you're not going to get relief from it. You're going to get relief as it and for it. And to me, that's the real bondage of self, is through identification. If you take yourself to be the parasite, the mind that takes itself to be the parasite can never entertain being free of it. It can only entertain being free as it, yeah? So it goes for therapy and this and that and socialization of it and try to make it, please don't ruin this next relationship. Let me help be okay at that next picnic I go to. And I mean, your idea of success gets so low, yeah? Because you can't be free of it because you take yourself to be it. It's like the greatest strategy of any parasitical movement is to convince the host that it's the host. That's the whole point of alcoholism. So when we have meetings in alcoholism, when you go to recovery meetings, and there's a lot of people there, and a lot of people are sharing what it's like to be an alcoholic, yeah? Which is they share their feelings, their thoughts, and their reactions to life. And you're sitting there for a few months listening to this, and you're probably in a very strong sense of terminal uniqueness, because that's one of the qualities of the disease, is to feel like no one can understand you. No one thinks like you. No one feels like you. No one has done the heinous things that you have done. Yet you're sitting in a room and people seemingly are sharing your thoughts, your feelings, yes, and your actions that you've done in life. You can only come to two conclusions. How did these people get my thoughts? How do these people get my feelings? How do these people get my behaviors? Or they're not your feelings. They're not your thoughts. They're not your behaviors. So in a sense, in my experience over the years in recovery, I'm not identified with who is in the room. I'm identified with what's taken them over. Because the same parasite that's they're talking about being under, I've lived under. And I recognize it when they share that they've lived under the same tyranny. If a normal person comes into a meeting, some of the things we'd say they'd be aghast at. But all the people that have alcoholism identify and they start laughing. It's not who you are, it's what's taking you over. It's that dominant of a strain of parasitical movement that you will take yourself to be that, and you will have similar thoughts that any other alcoholic has, similar feelings, and similar reactions to life. It's like a foreign installment. And so for me, the first step was the beginning of breaking that mental process. The way the mind deals with things is by denying it. Instead of, and see, if you're not that, the greatest way to feel like you are is if you're constantly denying it all day. If you would allow it to finally rest, you would see that you're not that. But while you're trying to get out of it, you're in it more than ever. Yeah. The mind moves in different ways. It has different strategies, and yet most of them don't work. It's a failed system. That's why in the program of AA in recovery, they say in this thing called the fear inventory, why are you in so much fear today? And he doesn't let you answer because you'd probably tell a huge story about circumstances. No, 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 no. Isn't it because self-reliance has failed us? So we have become reliant on a system of thought and interpretation called selfing. And we become so reliant on it, we take ourselves to be it, which you cannot go any farther than that. You cannot. When I did drugs, I never became the drug I was doing. I never became cocaine. I never crossed the line and became liquor. But I'm telling you now that I start from that. I start from that extremeness. I have taken myself to be a foreign installment. It's using this opportunity as transportation to express itself. Yeah, it's a parasitical movement of mind. That's what alcoholism is. You can't get an x-ray of it. You'll see its effects on the organs, but you can't x-ray it. You can't take an MRI. You can't see it, but you can know it by its effects. Yeah? That's what's so beautiful about recovery, because it allows people to come into a room everywhere, anywhere in the world, and share what it's like to be an alcoholic, and also now what it's like to be free from alcoholism. It's incredible. It's like there was no solution to this dilemma until 1935. It blows my mind. And my sense of it is that portal of grace that opened up and brought about a solution here to an unsolvable situation is still pumping out the grace.